Welcome back to another episode. We're really excited today. We have a special guest. It's Dr. Fanike Kiara Olubala Young, and she is a doctor of behavioral health as well as a healer and someone who focuses on financial trauma. We are so thrilled to have you here, Dr. Fanike. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. I know that you are a licensed trauma therapist, and tell us about how you went from the academic, behavioral health route to trauma therapy to then going into more of the holistic healing mechanisms that I know that you advocate for.
So, I would actually say that that started in childhood. It's amazing how, the things in your life, when you look back, everything kind of contributes to getting you to that point or to this point. And I really don't even feel like I'm done with, adding things and learning things and expanding even more. But it definitely started in childhood. My mom was very big on, taking holistic, natural approaches. Whenever we were, sick, she gave us cod liver oil and orange juice almost every morning. And we weren't very, sickly children. I remember my grandmother telling us to eat onions, if we were feeling, a little ill, and then by the next day we would be fine. So I've never really been introduced to, take a lot of medicine, go to the store, buy medicine, or go to the doctor, take this prescription. My mom was very, she didn't even drink alcohol when we were growing up. She was very, let's just eat properly. If you eat a certain way, because honestly, and this is just how I was raised, your medicine is your food. The things that you put into your body every day, those are really the things that are supposed to keep your immune system up and to help you keep a, just a healthy balance. And so, as you know, everything that we eat, it impacts us in some way. And everything that you eat has, if especially if it's from the earth in its natural form. It has healing properties that come with it. So yeah, I started out that way, and then just going into academics and just really trying to figure out what aligned with me and what made me feel good. And I remember while I was getting my doctorate, and we had the intern during my program, I decided that I wanted to look at integrated care in an allopathic and a naturopathic clinic, and to see, of the two settings, which did I prefer, which did I think, more so lean toward that integrated approach. And what I found was that in the allopathic setting, which was great to work in, great experience, worked with wonderful doctors. It was different. I felt very restricted. I wasn't able to, do a lot of, I think you should meditate. I think that you should, look at, let's talk about what you're eating. Because there, the approach was, oh, well, you have an ailment. Okay, I'm going to write you a prescription. Oh, okay, this came up. Okay, I'm going to write you a prescription. And I've just never felt like that aligned with me. But when I worked in the naturopathic clinic, which I wound up interning in and then also staying on as a behavioral health consultant for about 2 years with them. That specific doctor, she brought in a chiropractor. She had nutritionists come in. She had a sauna in her office. It was just a different approach, and that felt more like home to me. So I would say that I've just always been in that space where, really teaching people that, hey, everything that you need is around you. I do believe that, God has given us everything on earth that we need for us to heal ourselves.
That's wonderful. I love that. And I think what's interesting is you were ahead of your time in, choosing this path because it's becoming more and more um, popular. And I see people aligning more with an integrative approach. But, there were a lot of years where
Mhm,
it wasn't very um, accessible or even really well known, I think.
mhm.
So I commend you for that. That is awesome. How did you get into trauma, specifically?
The thing is that psychology itself it became really intriguing to me when I got to college. And the reason why is because, you have to take like that Psych 101 course, which is like a part of the core classes when you're getting a bachelor's degree. And so I'm taking Psych 101, and the teacher started talking about trauma and, what trauma is and how it impacts our lives and, how upsetting it can be and the damage to our bodies and how it impacts the amygdala and, our nervous system. And so the teacher is, discussing all those things, and I started to realize that, wow, maybe that's why I act the way I act. Maybe that's why I respond the way that I respond. Maybe that's why I have trouble in my relationships. Maybe that's why I have so much anger. That's why, I had resentment and just difficulty communicating to others and telling them how I felt. And, maybe that's why I was overcompensating and, caring for my family and, why I always felt like, hey, I didn't necessarily have a voice to um, share my true opinions. I always felt like I had to, really cater it to make it sound good for others, make it more digestible for other people. And, just started to look back at, the domestic violence in the household in which I grew up and, losing my father at 6 and witnessing someone get murdered. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York in the 80s, in the crack epidemic when things were really, really bad. There was a methadone clinic cat a corner to our house. The hospital I was born in, they actually, they put a methadone clinic in that hospital. And so I literally could look out the window and, every morning see, people lined up down the street so that they could, get that methadone. But I, thought back on that, like, maybe I'm here, I made it out, I'm in college, but maybe there's something that, I haven't necessarily dealt with. And so that class, I would say, really like set me on a course to understand myself, but also my parents. And when I started to do that, I also started to look at the world differently and people differently. And I started to realize that, oh, wow, like other people have things that they've gone through. Maybe that's why they act the way that they act, and so maybe that's why, that person is always yelling and screaming and, lashing out at people. It's the same thing. And so it started to kind of shift my perspective and my reactions towards others. And I just found it fascinating. On the brain and all those things. And so yeah, I would say that that kind of kicked it off for me.
Absolutely. I find all of it, equally fascinating, and that, the bridge between the body and the mind, and, just so we're so siloed in Western culture,
Mhm.
and what you're speaking to is just a total integration, because there is no separation. It's a pretend separation between the mind and the body. So I think, what you're speaking to, it's music to my ears, of course. How did you get into financial trauma? I think that is such an interesting area, and I think for my listeners, that's going to be, it's a newer subject that we haven't covered, and I think that's really intriguing. I would love to know, what is financial trauma, and how do you
So
know if you have financial trauma? Do you want me to do that again?
no, oh, well, it's up to
Okay.
you.
Jace, you want me to do that again? Okay. Let's start again. Okay. How do you know what is first of all, what is financial trauma, and how do you know if you have financial trauma?
So financial trauma is very similar to just, general trauma, but when we take it and focus it on our financial mindset, the way that we respond to money, our relationship with money. And so the way that I guess I would define financial trauma is, any lesson, anything that you've seen, anything that you've been told, anything that you've been shown or experienced that then shifts your perspective about your relationship with money and the energy of money in a negative way is considered, financial trauma. And so I'll give you an example. We have some people. I'm around. I'm in the coaching arena, around coaches, around therapists, and so oftentimes, what I find is that people say, "Oh, I need help." or hey, I'm trying to grow this business and I'm having difficulty. And so it's like, hey, well, maybe you should hire, this person, or hire someone to help you, to fix or whatever, to attend to, whatever the issue is. And the person, will kind of clam up and get really fearful. And, when it's like when I'm able to break it down with them to say, well, what's going on? Or, and they'll say to me, well, I just don't know. Like if I spend this money, I don't know, if more money will come. I have this fear of, investing in myself pretty much, or investing in my business. So, it can look like that underspending, which is that. It can also look like overspending. So you have some people who, let's say they make, $50,000 a year. But if you look at their spending habits, they're spending, 75, $80,000 a year. They typically they don't have a budget. They don't subscribe to a budget. They detest the word budget. It's viewed budget is looked like, oh, it's limitations on what it is that they can do. But oftentimes, that as well is, a part of that financial trauma. Why don't you want to look at the money that you really make? I actually had a client who she had a stack of, just bills in her office, and she refused to look at them. And I was like, well, we're going to work on that. And so she had to go through them and she had to add them up. And then we did a budget to see, hey, this is going to be the payment plan for you to get everything paid off. This is what you need to do. This is what needs to happen. But before I came along, and I said, listen, it's okay. You don't have to avoid it. So that's one thing. That's another thing is that you'll see people avoiding. You'll see people saying, well, I don't even want to talk about money. I don't want to have money conversations. I hear a lot of women, who don't know what's going on in their households and their husbands are managing the finances. And, there's that avoidance, and I think women have a special kind of financial trauma, because the reality of the situation is that we weren't even able to own bank accounts till I think what the 60s.
Mhm.
And so if we think about that, we are very much behind when it comes to like financial literacy and just being aware of how to invest. And so women have a huge catch up that we need to get caught up on, for us to get in place. And then I would say minorities are the same. And so it's we have to be just very clear about that and acknowledge it, and don't just act like, oh no, I got it all together. So I'm all for hiring people and putting people in place. And then the next sign that I would say that you can also look out for is that lack of boundaries. And so that's something I struggled with for years. I quit my job. I became an entrepreneur around 2009, and I quit my job after I wrote this proposal. The proposal got funded. The manager at my job promised to put me in place to run the program. It got funded, and then she didn't do what she said she was going to do. I gave my 3 days notice. This was 2008, and the recession was in place. I called my mom. I said I just gave my notice, and she was like freaking out. And I'm going to bring my mom back into this in a minute, but she's freaking out, and she's like, "You need a job. It's a recession." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I'll be okay." And so I quit, and I started my business and I started contracting, and the rest is history. But, I found myself, even though I was making, pretty good money, I was helping to take care of my family. Again, like I wasn't budgeting. I had difficulty saying no, when they did ask for something, because I carried this guilt of, oh, I'm the person that, went to school, and, I have my degrees. And at the time I had my bachelor's and my master's, and I felt like, yeah, I'm the person that's supposed to make sure that everyone else is okay. And the reality of the situation is that I couldn't really afford to take care of them, take care of me, and then also save and invest the way that I should have. And so even though I got an early start with making good money, I started late, when it came to investing and, saving and doing the things that I needed to do to make sure I was taken care of. So I would say those are like four just quick signs to say, you know what, I may have some financial trauma. For me, my mom, her message was, work hard. She got up at 5 a.m. and sometimes we didn't see her till 7 p.m., 8 p.m. at night. And she was working, 12 to 14-hour days. And her message was, get a job. If you get a job, there's security in a job. And, you get a job and then you stay at that job and you retire from that job and you'll get a pension and you'll live well. And that's just not real. It's just not real. I think back then it was. But this is the thing. I remember being 14 years old and I was out with her and I'm like, "Hey, I wanted to get these sneakers." And I was like, "Yeah, I want these sneakers." And she said to me, "Hey, I need to tell you something." And I'm like, "Okay." And she's like, "My job is moving to Mexico." And so she had her pink slip and she showed me the pink slip and she said, "You have to get a job." And she said, "If you want to, get school clothes for, next school year, you have to get a job." And I was like, "Okay, like, all right, okay, all right, so I have to get a job," because in my head, I was like, "Well, if I want to get a job, I can get a job. It's an option." But now it was, "No, you have to get a job." So if you want these things, and at that age, I'm like, "Yeah, I want these clothes and I want these shoes and I want these, these whatever. I want to go out with my friends and I want to, do all those things that teenagers do." But she's like, "Yeah, that's great. And I want you to do that stuff, but you're gonna have to fund it yourself." And so for me, it was a wake up almost, and it kind of set me into this mode of I went to school and I graduated early, so I was ahead in my in high school. And so by the time I was 16, I had like three classes left. And so I was getting out of school around, I think, like 12. It was like 12 p.m., I think. And then I would go to work from there and I would work from like 1 to like 8 p.m. or something like that. And then go home. But, I remember when I would get paid and I would go cash my checks and I would, tell my mom, like, "Hey, I made this amount." And she'd say, "Okay, put this amount away and you spend this amount." And I would say, "Okay." Um, but in my head, I was like, I need to make more money if I want to be able to live, a certain way. And so even when I got older and I'm in school and I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to do, I was in school and I was working full time and, I was, then I had the business and I was working the business and I'm doing, it just never felt like it was enough. And I was like, well, I have to be able to work hard because I have to be able to provide and, build this lifestyle. And it wasn't, anything extravagant, but still, it was like, oh, for me to take care of myself and for me to live well, I have to work hard. And so, now we see that that has become a part of the culture as well. For in our music, you have to hustle hard and get out there and hustle, girl, and get out there and grind and, never sleep. Millionaires wake up at 5 a.m. And I'm like, first of all, when I become a millionaire, I'm not waking up at 5 a.m. I'm sleeping in until my body says wake up because someone else is going to be in place to make the money for me. And I won't have to worry about making the money because I have hired a whole team to make my money for me. And I could just stop in on the operations when every day if I want to. But if I still have to get up at 5 a.m., even when I'm a millionaire, we have a problem. So there's this whole culture around, working hard and, like just like killing ourselves for it to make this money. And I just don't agree with that. I think that that's a part of financial trauma as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because the hustle culture, I'm also aware that it comes out of trauma.
Yes.
So, for a lot of high achieving women, especially, it's a trauma response. It's a way of dissociating, it's a
Mhm.
way of, remaining in control.
Yeah.
Not really, but I mean,
Yeah.
we tell ourselves that because
Right.
that's
Exactly.
my drug of choice too is work,
Hmm.
and so that's something I've been working on my whole life since I've been aware that it's a trauma response of how to listen to the body instead of the hustle culture,
Mhm.
and how to question some of those social messages that we get
Yep.
that are really seen as part of personal development. And so it's counterintuitive because you're reading these personal development books and it's promoting hustle culture, which is actually a trauma response. And I think you have to be really discerning. And it's another reason I think your work is so important, because when we are in tune with the body, our own body will tell us what's right for us. And there are people who it's right for them to get up early. That's their
Mhm.
body clock.
Mhm.
And there are people who, like me, and it sounds like you, 5 a.m. is not my body clock. And that's okay too, right? It doesn't mean we're not going to reach our goals. It doesn't mean we're not hard workers. It means we're listening to our body and allowing an integrative approach to our life, essentially. So I
Yeah.
love that.
Definitely. I think that, like you hit it right on the nail, hit the nail right on the head. One of my favorite examples to use is Steve Harvey. And, Steve Harvey is, I think he's hilarious. I've watched several of his shows, several of his movies, but there are so many parts to, I think, the message that he sends that I'm not in agreement with. And, part of it is he has, openly shared that he didn't come from a necessarily, rich background. He's been homeless before. He grew up in, in impoverished conditions. But now, he still works like, 10 shows at a time. So he has his radio show and he has, the Steve Harvey show, and he has the game shows, and he has the this and then that and this. And it's exhausting. And the other piece is, how old are you? So at what point do you get to just cut it off and say, you know what? Enough is enough. And I've put enough things in place, because I think he has books as well. I've put enough things in place to get, that residual income. I've put enough things in place, like my talk show, to where I only have to come into the studio maybe 3 times a week. I have a crew. The crew can manage the show. At what point do you say, let me just, sit back? I'm so not in agreement with, the way that, especially in the United States, you work for, what's the age of retirement now? It's like 67, 68 or something
Getting
insane.
later and later.
And, I look at my mom. My mom is 75 years old. And, at 75, things are hurting and she can't move the way that she used to. She still gets out there and cuts her own grass and, does her thing. But, I'm like, if I wait until I'm 68 or 69 or whatever the age of retirement is to begin enjoying the fruits of my labor, right? That's a problem for me. And so I was very clear when I met my husband, like, I want to retire by the time I'm 50. Like, and that's pushing it. That is like the end. Like 50 is 50 is like the end. And I'm turning 40 this year. And so I'm like, I have about 10 years left in me because, and it's not even necessarily say that I'll necessarily stop working. I may have like clients that I see every now and then virtually. And so I'll be anywhere I want to in the world and working with them. But it's more so, mentally, it's like I have about 10 years left of this whole, working multiple things, doing all the things. And because I found myself back in January just feeling like I need a break. Like I felt burnt out. I felt like I was not in a space of alignment. I felt like, I had a practice, I was doing therapy. It no longer worked for me, that model. And I was like, I really, really want to do more of like a coaching approach when I'm working with my clients. And so I was like, I'm going to close my practice. I'm going to shift out of that space and kind of shift the energy. I wrote a book. The book came out in December. I was like, I want to focus some time on, selling my book, getting my book out there. I started to do a lot of podcast interviews. I was, in all the things. I had some coaches. I had like 4 coaches at a time. that I was working with. And then by January, I was like, okay, I'm tired. And I didn't, I don't work for myself to be tired. It's just not something I want to do. And so, I had to make some decisions and I was like, you know what? I'm going to pull back a little bit and really figure out, what do I want this to look like? And, that is what led me to, trainings and workshops and trying to reach the masses, because that's one of my goals is, to leave a legacy in which I help to heal, thousands and hundreds, thousands of, people. And I can't do that, working one on one. And so I had to kind of move, back a little bit and really stop listening to everyone else and start to drown out, like some of that noise. Because that's what it is. Whenever you're listening to someone else, what you're not doing is listening to yourself. And so, we have to like position ourselves to really listen to ourselves. My family and I, we went to Alaska for spring break, and we were in Fairbanks, and Fairbanks is kind of rural. And so like we're up in the mountains. It was like houses, but they weren't, super close. The kids were able to go out and play in the snow and build snowmen and take sleds and slide down the mountain and, do all that. We went dog sledding and it was great. But the greatest part of it was the quiet, and I was able to really like reset. It felt like, okay, I'm clear. I know what it is that I want to do and I know how I want it to look. And working hard to do it is really not a part of the the program. So, we need that space. We need that space to hear ourselves and tap into our higher selves.
Absolutely. I am such an advocate for choosing at least 1 day a week where you have nothing.
Right.
And I think, if you're a religious person, you might call it the Sabbath. If you're spiritual, you're calling it, getting quiet and going into your meditative practice, perhaps. But my children, I get a lot of pushback on this from some of my children
Mhm.
because I am very, very strict about making that day. It is family
Mhm.
and it is resting and it is playing
Mhm.
together as a family.
Mhm.
And, I find it so restorative, and that's
Mhm.
just 1 day.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so when we can carve out and when we choose to carve out more time, I think that is when we can tap into our, intuitive knowing,
Mhm.
as you say. So I'm really that's such a blessing that you're able to have that time to refocus and create space so that you could work with intention. How as a I always think about when I'm having these conversations, there's always a part of me that's thinking about, of course, my own self and how do I know if I have financial trauma? That always goes through my head. And then the next thought is, how do I make sure my kids aren't financially traumatized?
Mhm.
And because so much of trauma gets passed down, we know from 7 to 8 generations down.
Mhm.
And that's, peer-reviewed literature over and over that's been shown that it actually changes our genetic expression.
Mhm.
So if we're not only trying to heal ourselves, but also stop those cycles and help our children, what sort of thing as a parent do you have in place or do you suggest that we can do to help our children have more financial literacy and less financial trauma?
Mhm. So we have 3 kids. My husband had 2 children, so I have 2 bonus children. They are 13 and 14. The 14-year-old lives with us. And then the 13-year-old, she comes over every other weekend and during breaks. And then we also have a 3-year-old. And the 13 and 14-year-old, although they are not my, they're my biological children, one of the things that, I'm a therapist. So certain things are not taboo to me that probably would be, to other people. And then I'm also, people call it a stepmom, I'm also a stepmom. So I don't have that tie to them like their mothers. And so I have conversations with them that, even my husband, he's like, oh. I'm like, no, we have to talk about this. Like, this is important. It doesn't, it doesn't impact me the way that it impacts, I guess, a parent. But and I think that's just a part of my personality as well. But, one of the things that I'm constantly doing with them is, we're discussing. So we're having just open conversations. And one of my biggest lessons with them is I don't care how much money you have. If my son, he gets $10 a week in allowance, and which to me I think is a lot because I my mother was not giving me $10 a week at 14, right? But he earns $14 a week in allowance. Now I do allowance a little differently. I do allowance where he starts with $14. I mean, he starts with $10. And if he gets in trouble in school issues, they're a dollar deduction. Issues at home are like 50 cents. And him being disrespectful, especially now with the teenage attitudes and all that, being disrespectful is a dollar. So he starts with $10 and he can lose money, rather than starting from zero and having to earn the money. And what that does is, I think for him, it's like he's also been diagnosed with ADHD. And so what it does for him is he sees the $10. Like he's like, okay, the 10 is there. It's harder for him to conceptualize, okay, I have nothing and I have to then earn, the $10. The reality of the situation is if you work at a job, right, and they say that, hey, I'm going to pay you such and such an hour, you're actually starting with, whatever it is that hourly rate is. So if you make $10 an hour, you actually start with that $10 an hour. Now, where things go, where you get deductions can be, if you break something at work, or, something happens and you have to, get sent home, or whatever the case may be. But you start with your rate. If you're salaried, you start with your salary, right? They pay you, right? So for him, in my head, I said, well, I'm going to treat you that way because when you get out into the world and you start working, that's really how it is. Your job is to maintain the standard. So the standard has been set. You then have to maintain the standard. So we have that conversation. But as I mentioned, he's my bonus son. So at his mother's house, things are a little different. The ideals are different. The values are different. We don't believe in spending a lot of money on sneakers and clothes and shoes. That's not how I was raised. Now, what my mother did spend money on for us was experiences. And so for them, I'm the same way. So we travel as a family. We do things. That's the stuff that we spend money on. Flights, we're a family of five. So for us to fly can get a little expensive, right? And so, every time we go on a trip, it's easy, even if it's a trip in the United States, easy, $5,000 easy. And, that is, it's okay. We're going to go on a trip. You guys want to do this? Great. We have to start budgeting and saving the money to do that. So we have a travel account, my husband and I, that we put money into. And then we have accounts for them that all of the three kids, each month, there's a certain amount of money that goes into their accounts. And they are very aware of, hey, you have accounts where we're saving money. This is how much money. And they always ask, well, how much money is in my account now? And so we'll tell them, right? But you cannot spend it on foolishness, right? That money has to go towards some type of investment. And so even with, like I said, my older kids last year, we said, hey, we will take $500 and invest it into a business concept that you want to, develop. And all I need is a, very mini business plan. I gave them the parts to the mini business plan and I never received it back. Never received it back. And so we wound up not investing in them starting a business. And when I asked them, well, why didn't you submit it? It was like, oh, well, it was just a lot of work and I, didn't want to do. Okay, that's fine. What I find is that what I find with them is that they see that I'm self-employed. My husband is also self-employed. And so my son, he sees the, staying up late sometimes at night, sometimes I'm up till 2 in the morning, working on something. And that's how my mind works. So if I'm focused on something, I don't want to stop. It's like, nope, I just like keep going because it's flow, especially if I'm in like a state of flow. So I'm like, nope, let me just keep going. And so he sees that part. He also sees that, hey, some months are great, some months are not. He sells like Rice Krispie treats at school. And one day he made $30 selling Rice Krispie treats. The next day he made $2. And he came home and he's like, I only made $2 today. And I said, great. That's why that $30 that you made yesterday, you don't then go out and buy an expensive meal because you made $30 one day. You take that $30 and you budget it out because you may have some days where you're not going to hit that $30 mark. And so it's having those conversations, it's being an example. It's not, I grew up in a household where I still to this day, I can't tell you how much money my mother made. I have no clue what
Yeah.
her salary was. I cannot tell you to save the life of me. I cannot tell you how much bills were. I know how much our rent was because, and the only reason I know that is because when she was about to retire, her landlord sold the building that we were raised in, and the new landlord came in and said, hey, if you want to stay here, your rent will triple. And my sister and I had to say, well, how much is it? And if you want to stay, we will do what we need to do to help you stay there. And my mother's response to us was, we will not waste money on this, and I will figure something else out. And she did. And she went and stayed with one of her friends until it was time for her to retire. And what I didn't know is that my family, we have land in North Carolina. And my mom was working on, she had tore my grandmother's house down, of course, my grandmother has passed away, but she tore my grandmother's house down and she was building a house on my grandmother's land. So when my mother retired, her house was paid for, her car was paid for. She really had no, serious bills. And even now, I've never gotten a call from her to say, hey, I need you to pay something or I need you to take care of me. She has positioned, put herself in a great position to care for herself. My mom, she purchased life insurance policies, not huge, but all of her children, there's three of us, have life insurance policies. My sister, three two of her kids, the two oldest ones, they have life insurance policies. My brother's oldest kids, they have life insurance policies. And then I have a life insurance policy. And it's so those were things that she was kind of showing us. It wasn't really a, let's talk about money conversation, but it was me looking at her, watching the things that she does. And so I think with our kids, it's so important. The only thing that I would change about my childhood is I feel like we would have had more conversations. I feel like, that would have been very beneficial to be able to ask her, like, hey, so what are, the bills, and, what are, these things. And I remember when I did get that job, saying, hey, can I pay a bill in the house? Because at that time, by then, it was just her and I in the house. And so, a lot of like my food and, I was kind of handling that stuff. But I think with our kids, it's, again, like I said, it's being open, being honest. My son saw I had something up on my board that said, hey, by the time I'm 40, I want to be a millionaire. And he read it and he came in there. He said, you want to be a millionaire by the time and I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, but that's soon. I was like, yeah, it is, right? And he's like, well, how do you plan to do it? And I said, this is the thing that you don't understand. And so I kind of like broke it down to him. And I said, it takes one thing to work. You may have 50,000 ideas. It really just takes one idea to work for you to reach your goal. You don't always have to, like, all 50,000 don't have to work, and that's okay. And I said, where people go wrong is, they'll set 50,000 goals, but they don't have the fortitude and resilience to stick through it. And so by the time that 25th or that 50th or even that 100th goal, it doesn't work, or that 100th idea doesn't work, they'll give up. And I said, that is the difference between people who accomplish their goals and those that do not. People that know that, hey, you have to keep going and that this thing is not easy. And my husband and I, we always joke and I say, this entrepreneurship life is not for punks. Like you cannot be a punk in this on this entrepreneurship journey, right? You cannot because you're gonna have some days that's gonna like kick your behind,
Mhm.
like, and then you're gonna have some days that are gonna be like freaking great, right? It's gonna be wonderful. But then you're gonna have some days that's gonna really, really test and be like, oh, I just want to throw the whole business in the trash. And, but the goal is to keep going. And regardless of those days, I wouldn't trade it. So we have, again, we have those discussions. They see the work, they see the things that we do. I have a trade show coming up in like 2 weeks, and I'm speaking, and I had to order a backdrop, and I had to order these things. And, we bring the stuff in the house just and we're building it and we're putting it together. And he's like, oh, what's that? And I'm like, oh, it's my backdrop because I'm speaking and I'm going to sell my books. And he's like, wow, that's cool. And I'm like, yeah, like you get to create, what this looks like for you. Your life is not predestined. You get to say, you know what, I want to work this amount of time, and this is what I want my life to look like, and I want my 3-year-old to know that, nothing's outside of his reach. And so anything that he wants to do, he can. And so I'm working now to make sure that when he gets there, he has enough, money saved and enough assets to where he can really focus on what it is that he loves, as opposed to focusing on doing the things that he feels like he has to do. And instead, he can focus on what he loves, because I feel like everyone should at least experience that at least once in their lives.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I love that those messages you're giving to your children. I'm taking mental notes. One of the things I learned recently is my language matters when I talk about money.
Yes.
So, I have a kid who has anxiety,
Mhm.
and I was saying, "Oh, we don't have the money for that this month." And I could see his anxiety spike, and I
Mhm.
thought, "Wait, how could I rephrase that?" Because in his mind, that means we're destitute.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in
Mhm.
my mind, it was I haven't budgeted for that, and
Right.
so I had to really think about it was just this week I've been thinking about how can I phrase things so that it's more accurate and it doesn't get his nervous system,
Mhm.
going.
Say exactly what you just said, which is, "I haven't budgeted for that."
Yeah.
So, that lets him know that, oh, there is a budget. And, when it's like, "Oh, well, what is a budget?" Yeah, regardless of how much money I make, there is a budget for how much we actually spend of what it is that we make. And so it has to go into this money that we've set aside to spend, because we don't spend it all. So have like I would say that, and that's exactly what I tell my kids, like, nope, that's not in the budget right now.
I love that. Thank you. Because I've been doing a lot of thinking this week. As you're right, as usual with children, how can we help them flourish without
Yeah.
causing any damage? So I appreciate that. Tell me what's I love to give our listeners one tip, a takeaway that they can use at home. And I know you're an advocate for self-healing. What is a tip that you would give our listeners for working on their financial trauma, essentially, or healing some of that so that they can really optimize their own experiences in life?
What I would say is, when it comes to any type of drama, be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. Don't, look at your money, realize, this is how much I make. Realize though that you have options and you can always make more money. There's so much money out there. So you can always make more money, but it has to start with being honest with yourself and taking a real look at what it is that you bring in versus what it is that you're, shelling out. Being real honest with, what are some of your limitations when it comes to your financial literacy. So, what is it that you know versus what is it that you don't know? YouTube is like free. And there's so many, videos and, tutorials and things. And, listen to it when you're in the car driving, turn off the radio, turn off the music, play your YouTube through your car and listen and learn some things. There are so many resources that you don't have to be stuck. But it starts with being honest with yourself about where you are, and being honest with yourself about where it is that you want to be. and really assessing, are you on the path to reaching, that goal of where it is that you want to be.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Where can our listeners find you? Where are you at? And please tell us where we can purchase your book and tell us a little bit about your book.
I'm everywhere.
Excellent.
So I'm on Instagram, at Dr. Fanike, DrFanike. I'm on LinkedIn, same handle. I'm on Facebook, same handle. Clubhouse, same handle. So everything across the board is the same at Dr. Fanike. And my book, What the F is Your Problem? Becoming an Active Worker and Healing Your Trauma, is available on my website, which is drfanike.com. And the book is about really empowering others and letting them know that, one, they're not alone in the traumas that they have endured. But then also, once you realize that, hey, I have endured some trauma, what do I do next? And so the book highlights, some things that you can kind of do yourself, how you can take your healing into your own hands, and also being clear that, the only way to really begin the healing process for trauma is to become an active worker. And that means that, unfortunately, it's not as easy as saying, well, I went to a therapist and I fixed it. Nope, doesn't work like that. And I think people have a false concept of, of the healing process, but it's something that you have to work on every day. And even as a therapist, I work on my trauma every day. I have to tell myself, all of the affirmations, and I have to destroy those limiting beliefs. And they may not be as strong as they were, back in the day now, but they still pop up every now and then, and try to tell me I can't do something, or, hey, this isn't going to work, or, their relationship isn't going to work. And, all that stuff still pops up every now and then. But, and now I know, and I'm armed with the tools to know what to do when it does pop up. So definitely check that out. It's What the F is Your Problem? Becoming an Active Worker and Healing Your Trauma. You can purchase it at drfanike.com. And definitely feel free to reach out and follow me on IG. And yeah, send me a DM. Let's talk.
Wonderful. Thank you again for
No
being here.
problem.
I really appreciate your generosity, and it was really lovely to hear your wisdom.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you again for having me.
Absolutely.